Today's lesson is from stage 26, and it actually features two concepts. The first one is called the gerundive. The second one is called a purpose clause, both of which you've already seen in the stories that we've read in this stage. We're going to start quickly by reviewing old participles. You have known the present active participle. You have translated it as blanking. You have seen it as the present stem plus ns for the nominative singular, or you've seen the present stem plus nt plus some sort of ending from the third declension. Dormientem means sleeping. Clamans means shouting. Occupantibus, seizing. Accusantes, accusing. You have also seen perfect passive participles. Having been blanked is our stock translation for them. It's a fourth principal part, and it comes with a first or second declension ending. Accusatus, having been accused. Occupati, having been seized. Servato, having been saved. Instructorum, having been drawn up. Which leads us then to a new participle. It's called the future passive participle. However, we're going to be talking about the future passive participle by a different name. The future passive participle is most well known in Latin as something called a gerundive. A gerundive is still a participle, which means it's an adjective. Gerundive, adjective. That's going to come in handy later in Latin. The good news for all of you is that a gerundive is actually really easy to recognize because it has the present stem and then it has the letter nd, just like the word gerundive. And then it has an ending from the first and second declension. Here are some examples of future passive participles / gerundives. Occupandus, servandum, referendum, which is actually where we get the English word referendum from as well, which is a ballot measure for voters to approve. Specifically today, we're going to be talking about a use of the gerundive called a gerundive of obligation. A gerundive of obligation features a gerundive, which is a future passive participle, a Latin adjective. It features a form of the verb to be. Generally, it's est or erat. Later in Latin, you're going to learn that there are other possibilities here. However, est and erat are by far the most common. And in a gerundive of obligation, you're also going to find a dative noun. A gerundive of obligation is somebody who must do something. So mihi fugiendum est is a gerundive of obligation, and it means I must flee. And in looking at this sentence, mihi is the dative noun, fugiendum is your gerundive, and then we have est, which is the form of the verb to be. In this sentence, tibi incella manendum est. The gerundive is manendum. Est is that form of the verb to be. And then we have tibi, which is the dative noun. You must remain in your cell. In the third sentence, we are talking to Workobrix, and yet we have him as a dative noun here with tibi, and then we have moriendum as the genitive. If you remember, at the end of stage 25, Modestus was yelling at Workobrix, and he said, Workobrix, you must die. So in a way, it's saying it's necessary for you to die. And then in our final sentence here, nobis is the dative noun. And then we have the gerundive, which is fugiendum est. So we must flee from the prison. Each of these gerundive of obligation phrases has the idea of must in it. So a gerundive of obligation is when the dative noun must do whatever that verbal action was that was in the gerundive. Previously, you've seen the same idea expressed as necesse est with a dative noun. So let's look at a contrast here. Previously, you knew the phrase necesse est mihi fugere, it is necessary for me to flee. We have the same idea in a gerundive of obligation. I must flee. Mihi fugiendum est. Now you know a more forceful obligatory way of saying Vercobrix, you must die. Previously, you might have seen a phrase that was Vercobrix necesse est tibi morire. It is necessary for you to die. The gerundive of obligation definitely has much more of a forceful tone to it. I must flee. You must die. The other new concept that we're going to be talking about today are purpose clauses. You've seen these at work in the Adventus Agricolae story as well as in Principiis. Let's review all of the subjunctive clauses that you know. You know cum clauses. Cum clauses start with the word cum, that means when, and then it has a subjunctive verb. An example, cum haec audivisset, when he had heard these things. You've also seen indirect questions. Indirect questions use a question word, for example, why, what, or how, which are the translations for cur, quid, and quomodo. And then you have a subjunctive verb. Nescio cur fugisset. I don't know, nescio, why, cur, fugisset. He had fled. Our new type of subjunctive clause is a purpose clause. It uses a little funny word in Latin called ut, and then it uses the subjunctive verb. You've already seen purpose clauses with ut in the Adventus Agricolae story. Agricola per ordines processit ut eos inspiceret. Inspiceret being your subjunctive verb. It's the imperfect tense because it's the infinitive with a personal ending. And we translated this that Agricola proceeded through the rows to inspect them. So ut really, in a very formal sense, means in order that he or she might. But that's a lot of words in an English sentence. So you could say a sentence, I went to the coffee shop in order that I might get a latte and cookies. But as I said, it's very verbose to say it like that. And in English, we can render the same phrase more simply as, I went to the coffee shop to get a latte and cookies. So we can use ut in a formal sense, in order that, or we can use it in a simplified sense to just mean to. Here are some examples for you. Barbilus quintum invitavit ut domum venirent. Barbilus invited Quintus in order that venirent he come home. Servi hastas iecerunt ut barbillam servarent. The slaves threw spears in order that they might save Barbilus. Formio ad urbem contendit ut medicum quaereret. Formio hurries to the city in order that he might find a doctor, or to find a doctor. You could do it both ways. Astrologus medicum iecit ut barbilum soneret. The astrologer threw out the doctor to, or in order that he might heal Barbilus. Just to be clear, though, a purpose clause is not an infinitive. An infinitive is used to complete the thought of another verb, and that's not how a purpose clause is used. And I just wanted to clarify that right now. So now you know several different ways of expressing a similar concept in Latin. You know how to express purpose using a couple different frameworks. The first one is using eubere, the verb of ordering, plus some sort of infinitive. In this sense, an infinitive is a complementary infinitive, which means it completes the thought of eubere. I order you to stop. So what am I ordering you to do? I need to complete that with something, and that's where I use an infinitive. A purpose clause works a lot differently, though, because a purpose clause, number one, doesn't have an infinitive. It does have a little Latin word called ut, but the subjunctive verb expresses a separate action. So he went to the headquarters, and now we're expressing the purpose. Why did he go to the headquarters? We can answer that in the same sentence, in order to have a conversation. So we're giving a reason for the first part of the sentence by expressing the purpose with a subjunctive clause. There's a little bit of purpose in a gerundive of obligation, right? Because there's sort of that underlying idea of an order. You must stop. So now you know 3 different types of subjunctive clauses in Latin. You know cum clauses, you know indirect questions, and you know purpose clauses. In order to differentiate them, you have to look at the words that are in the clause that has the subjunctive verb. So once you identify the subjunctive verb in the sentence, look around for some context clues to figure out what type of clause you're dealing with. If it has a cum in the same part of the sentence as the subjunctive verb, then you're dealing with a cum clause. If you have a question word in the same part of the sentence that has the subjunctive verb, then you're dealing with an indirect question. And if you have an ut in the same part of the sentence that has the subjunctive verb, then you're dealing with a purpose clause. Let's put this concept into practice. Here are some Latin sentences. We're going to go through it using our methodology and try to differentiate the types of subjunctive clauses that are present in them. In the first one, salvius memorem rogavit, cur cogitubno venenum non dedicet. The subjunctive verb is dedicet. So we're going to be looking in the clause that goes along with dedicet. That starts here. So now we're going to look through this clause and go through a little checklist in order to figure out what type of subjunctive clause it is. First question, does it have a cum in this clause? It does not. So let's go forward. Does it have a question word? Look at that. We have cur, which means why. That is a question word. So we can automatically identify it then as an indirect question. Salvius asked Memor why he had not given the poison to Cogidubnus. In our second sentence, cum salvius in horto ambularet, colloquium gravem cum memore habebat. The subjunctive verb is ambularet. So we're going to start looking at this part of the sentence that goes along with ambularet. And let's go through our checklist. Does it have the word cum? Look at that. We don't even have to ask ourselves any more questions. It is officially a cum clause. When Salvius was walking in the garden, he was having a serious conversation with Memor. In our third sentence here, the subjunctive verb is peteret. So now we're going to look to this part of the sentence to figure out what type of subjunctive clause it is. Do we have a cum in this part of the sentence? No, we do not. Do we have a question word in this part of the sentence? No, we do not. But do we have an ut in this part? Yes, we do. So we can check off our options and we end up with this being a purpose clause. Cogidubnus went to Aquae Sulis in order to seek a cure. Down here, Wilbia rubriae fibulam dedet et ut eam inspiceret. Here's our subjunctive verb with inspiceret, which means that the clause that we're looking at is in this part of the sentence. Going through our checklist, does that part of the sentence have a cum? It does not. Does it have a question word? It does not. But does it have an ut? It certainly does. So that makes it a purpose clause. Vilbia gave the brooch to Rubria in order that she might inspect it. or to inspect it. Either one is just fine. Our second sentence on the bottom row, modestus strythionem rogavit quo modo puellas vitare posset. Our subjunctive verb is posset, which means that we're going to be looking in this part of the sentence to figure out what's going on. Is there a quum in this part of the sentence? There is not. Is there a question word? Well, quo modo means how, which means that this is a question word, which makes this phrase an indirect question. Modestus asked Strythio how he was able to avoid girls. Finally, we come to our last sentence in the corner here, and we can identify the subjunctive verb as dedicet, and we know now that this is the part of the sentence that contains the subjunctive verb. So now we can start going through our checklist. Does it have a quum in this part of the sentence? The answer is yes. So it's a quum clause. We don't have to ask anything else. So our translation starts with that phrase. When Strythio had given the brooch to Vilbia, the girl was very happy. So if you have any questions, we will be working with this in class next time I see you, and we'll be working on differentiating subjunctive clauses as well as finessing your ideas on the gerundive of obligation and purpose clauses. And finally, here are the credits for the people who designed the template, not me. Have a great night.